were sent to me for presentations, and they'll also be provided in a VineWatch bulletin in our next edition. If I could ask everyone other than the speakers to remain on mute throughout the presentations, and hopefully your cameras are also off, but if they end up coming on, just for the seamlessness of the technology, if you could turn those off. You can submit questions, and that is done by the conversation tab on your toolbar. And if you list those questions in there, we'll go back through them with the speakers at the end of each one of the talks and try and address as many as we can within the time frame. Those that don't get addressed, we will just look at those with the speakers at a separate time and send out those responses to the individual questionnaires. So just moving on, we have our first speaker with us, so Susie Rogers. Susie is a Principal Research Scientist with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. She's also a member of the NWGIC in Wagga, and that's where Susie's coming from today. She has an extensive research background in viticulture and grapevine physiology, and today's talk from Susie is on her developments of the smartphone app to assess grapevine nutrient disorders. So thank you, Susie. Susie, if you could just unmute, because I muted everyone as they joined us.
Sorry, that would help, wouldn't it?
You're all good. You're all good to go.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'll be presenting our smartphone app for assessing nutritional disorders. That's not doing anything.
You're back off mute, that's good.
Back off mute, but I'm not. Why is that? Ah, there we go.
There you go, try one of your arrow bars, yep.
That's okay, I think we've got it. So vine nutrition is a key element of vineyard management, and nutrient disorders affect vine growth, as you know, yield, varied composition, and wine style. And each vineyard may have a unique combination of soil type, vine age, canopy architecture, cultivar, and rootstock. So therefore, nutritional requirements can vary between vineyards and even locations within a vineyard. The best way to determine vine nutrient status currently is through a petiole analysis at flowering. A number of petioles are collected across a representative area of the block, and then these are sent to diagnostic labs for analysis. The results are compared to reference standards, and we can determine what elements we need to apply. However, sometimes we get a bit impatient waiting for the results, and we might then turn to a field manual or a handbook of some sort to try to identify these symptoms. Problem is that the pictures in the field manuals aren't very clear all the time, and they don't show the progression of the symptoms as they're developing, and they don't also show cultivar differences. So we end up guessing, and we try to correct the situation without being fully informed. So we might apply the wrong remedy, and that's resulting in wasted dollars, and it's not so good for the environment. I guess what we need to do is develop methods to assess the symptoms quickly while we're waiting for those results from the tissue analysis at the lab. The advancement of image processing and machine learning has made it feasible to develop rapid tools to assess vine nutritional disorders. So this seminar presents our proposed method for using a smartphone app to capture and analyze images of the leaves for identifying these nutritional disorders. An AI smartphone app will give a grower immediate information on the cause of the grapevine disorder, and as a critical second step, it provides links to resources on how to address the problem. We wanted to first get a feel from the industry as to what they thought about this idea of creating a diagnostic app. And so we presented a survey to 4 growing regions, and the objectives of the survey were to assess current practice for assessing disorders and to see if the industry would be interested in using a diagnostic app for nutritional disorder assessment. It was a written survey. It had 17 questions. It was given about a year ago in Swan Hill, Mildura, Griffith, and Tumbarumba, and we had about 40 responses. And I'd like to thank all of those of you who took the time to fill out the survey. I'm sure some of you are here and are keen to see what the results are up to. But first, I'll just give a quick rundown of what the survey results showed. We asked about frequency of sampling. So nearly all of the respondents said that they would send their tissues off to the diagnostic lab, usually about once a year. About half said about once a year, and the other ones less frequently than this. Most used a combination of resources to diagnose disorders. About 65% relied on experience, but also other methods such as field manuals. 100% said that they would be interested in using the app. Only 15% said they are currently using some other sort of app in viticulture, and this included PMAP and Pest Idea. 100% wanted the app to be able to address not only nutrition, but also pests and diseases. We also asked about the accuracy that they would have wanted. The minimum accuracy was usually, this question was usually not answered, but of those that did answer, half said they wanted 80% accuracy, half said 90% was okay, and one person actually wanted 100% accuracy, which is fair enough. How long? Well, we also wanted to know the maximum processing time the users were willing to wait, and that ranged anywhere from an immediate response to a 1-day response. Most of the users wanted to be able to take the photo in the vineyard, about 70%, rather than having to take the leaf inside and take the photo inside. All wanted to be able to tag the geolocation of where the picture was taken, and all wanted to have links to fact sheets and other resources. So, given those really positive responses, gave us quite a bit of confidence that the diagnostic app would be of value to the industry. So we assembled an A team to carry out the work. In the middle is Tintu Baby. She's our physiologist on the project. We also have Alex Oskowski and Motur Rahman, who are experts in machine learning. So all 3 of those are funded by the Wine Australia project. We also have a number of advisors on the project, and these include Mano Paul and Li Hong Zheng, who are from the School of Computing and Mathematics at Charles Sturt. And we also have Bruno Hotzapfel Lee and Rob Oker from CSIRO to help advise on the viticulture aspects. So how do we go about developing an app? Well, first we need to create the symptoms of the nutrient disorders. We then take just RGB images of those symptoms using a smartphone camera. We then develop machine learning models to assess those images, and then we incorporate them into an Android platform. So first, the symptom creation. So Tintu has been in charge of this aspect of the project. So we have had to take out some really extensive method development to ensure that the symptoms we see are accurately linked to a specific nutrient deficiency or toxicity. So we started by growing the rootlings in the sand culture outdoors in potted plants. but we weren't able to create symptoms very quickly at all because the vines had quite a few reserves, nutrient reserves in them, because they were quite large. So we had to move to smaller vines in a perlite medium in the glass house. These vines were first grown from four node canes, but then we moved to single node cuttings, which had the minimum reserves as possible. So we focused on both Shiraz and Chardonnay, a red and a white variety, because symptoms might be different across these two varieties. We create nutrient specific solutions, and we feed those to the vines daily, and then we take images as the symptoms progress. We take hundreds of images of each symptom. We then verify the tissue nutrient levels at the end of the experiment to make sure that the symptoms are specific to that nutrient profile. So this is just a bit of Nutrition 101. You're probably very familiar with this, but as the nutrient concentration within the plant tissue increases, we usually see an increase in plant growth or yield up to a certain point. After that point, when we get into the adequate range, further increases in nutrients will not cause any further increases in growth or yield. Then we get into that luxury range where we've actually got a bit too much nutrients, but growth is not harmed. And then we get into the toxicity range where further increases in nutrient concentrations will result in declining growth and drops in yield. So here are some of the symptoms. I'll just go through them quickly. We're all very familiar with nitrogen deficiency. There's a very uniform loss of greenness and yellowing across the leaf blade. Veins don't remain bright green. The mature leaves are usually the ones that end up yellowing. Magnesium deficiency appears also first in the older leaves. The interveinal areas form yellow striations in Chardonnay, but in Shiraz they can have sort of a reddish tinge. The minor veins don't become accented as an iron deficiency, and in severe cases we get necrosis developing in the interveinal area, which then goes to the leaf, towards the interior of the leaf. Potassium deficiency also appears first in the older leaves. There's yellowing of the leaf margins, followed by burning of those leaf margins, and then the leaf margins may curl downward. With increasing severity, the burning progresses towards the center of the leaf. The emerging leaves usually look normal, but once they start to expand, they sort of become deformed and shiny and they roll downwards. Iron deficiency is really quite pretty. The younger leaves are affected first. These leaves show interveinal chlorosis and very dark green veins, including the minor veins, which gives it that sort of intricate lacy pattern. So I call this one the Belgian lace disorder. Necrosis is unusual. As the severity of the deficiency increases, chlorosis spreads to the older leaves. Boron toxicity is also very distinctive, and I call this one the leopard syndrome. The mature leaves develop these small dark spots, and these become surrounded by green-brown areas, and that's intermixed with the chlorotic areas. In severe cases, the necrotic specks, along the leaf margin, they sort of join up together and form this burnt edge. The young leaves show downward cupping, but the mature leaves don't. Okay, so we have now all the symptoms of several of these nutrient disorders, and we've taken hundreds of images of them. So first, the images are manually classified by cultivar leaf age and nutritional disorder. Two databases are created, one for training purposes and one for testing the model. We need to make sure that the file size is small enough to fit on the mobile device, and the diagnosis needs to be rapid but accurate. So we've attempted two different machine learning approaches. The first is the conventional image processing approach, and the second one is a deep learning approach. In the conventional approach, there's a pre-processing step where the leaf needs to be segmented out from the rest of the background. Features are then extracted, such as texture, color, and brightness, and then the leaf can be classified according to the disorder. The disadvantage of this approach is that it's slow. That's because each pixel requires an assessment. And so we thought we would sort of apply a cropping tool where you could crop the region of interest to decrease the number of pixels that needed to be assessed. But again, that's an extra step by the user. So the second approach that we've been looking at is a deep learning approach. And this includes 4 steps: object detection, model selection, model training, which is anywhere from 2 hours to 3 weeks, and then model validation. The advantage of this approach is that we can bypass the image segmentation. Leaf is automatically detected. And the second advantage is that the symptoms are automatically created through a training process. So, this is a little bit hard to see, perhaps. This is
2 minutes,
the outcome.
Susie.
2 minutes. The outcome of the models, which basically shows that we've got about the best one, has about 94% accuracy, which is pretty good. The file size is small enough to fit on the app, and it only takes about 600 milliseconds to analyze the images. So I'll just quickly step you through what the app looks like at the moment. So you can take a photo of your symptoms through the diagnostics. Once you take the photo, it'll end up in the gallery here, and then you can select a particular photo that you're interested in, and then you can add any sort of information such as where the picture was taken, the cultivar, and the age of the leaf. Then you hit the diagnosis button, and up comes the result of the diagnosis. Here it says magnesium deficiency in Shiraz, and it'll give a verbal description as well as some links to websites for further reading. The other component of the app is the library component. So here you can actually just scroll through a number of different disorders, pick one, and then up pops verbal description and also some of the links to the other websites. Yeah, so I guess at the moment this is a prototype. We'll test it out in the vineyard with growers this spring and hopefully get some good feedback on its functionality. The app will not be released for another 1.5 years, but we hope to add more disorders in the meantime and keep improving machine learning models. An additional note is the app is not intended as a replacement for plant tissue tests. It's meant to complement them. The app is only useful once visual symptoms appear. Hopefully you'll catch the problem early enough at diagnostic testing prior to symptom appearance. So I would like to give my thanks to the NWGIC, New South Wales DPI, and Charles Stewart for supporting this work, and especially to Wine Australia. I would also like to thank you for your attention, and if you would like to know more about the app, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you. Over to you, Darren.
Okay, thanks, Susie. Much appreciated. Good presentation. And one question I have, I think we've got a hand up from someone, but one question I have is those images that are captured, where are they, apart from that library section that you had, is there a repository, where the AI learning looks at all of those? Where is that held?
Okay, yeah, that's something we're sort of talking about how to deal with this issue. It would be fantastic if there is some sort of open library system that anyone can upload photos into. Yeah, we're thinking about what sort of cloud-based system we might use to do that. But at the moment, we haven't developed that yet, but hopefully in the next few months, we will develop something like that, which will really help. The more images we get in there, you know, once they're ground truth, the better and more accurate the results and the diagnosis will be.
Right. Okay. I'm just going to lower Acosta Cabralaris' hand. Acosta, if you have a question for Susie, if you'd like to come off mute and ask Susie your question. I can't see it in the conversation area. I'll just give Acosta a couple of seconds there, and maybe he or she is typing. No, it might be just a false alarm press button on the toolbar. That happens to all of us. So, Susie, you made it out without a question,
That's
apart
fantastic.
from me.
Well, look, if anyone has any other questions they want answered later, just, yeah, feel free to contact me anytime, and I'd be happy to
Sure.
share what I can.
Yeah, no worries. Your details are on the NWGIC and the DPI websites. Just by searching your name, you'll find them easily. Okay, no, hang on. We do have a question, Susie. Just let me jump in here. I've got something else in my way. Who will be chosen to test the app? Any growers in mind? Is that's from Juliet?
Okay. Yeah, I guess because of COVID and things, we thought we would first do sort of a workshop and get quite a few growers and interested people together. But because of that, we're going to actually visit individual growers to do this. If you're interested, please let me know. Happy to try to include as many people as possible. At the moment, we're thinking of testing in the Riverina and in the Orange regions, just because of proximity. But yeah, just let me know if you really want to get involved.
Okay. Thanks, Susie. Hopefully that answers Juliet's question and that she can contact you to get involved. So we're going to move on. So thank you, Susie. Our next speaker today is Angus Johnson. Angus is the Principal Consultant with Jackson Environment and Planning Proprietary Limited. Angus has a Bachelor of Engineering Honours and a Master's in Environmental Management and 20 years experience in waste management and resource recovery fields. Today he will discuss why it can be easy to waste money on waste. So take it away, Angus.
Thanks very much, Darren, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Are you seeing the presentation clearly, mate? Great, very good. Look, as Darren said, Jackson Environment and Planning specialise in waste management and resource recovery. That's my specialty too. That's mainly planning of recycling facilities and services. But I was fascinated with Susie's presentation as well, because I do have a bit of a history in using recycled organics in agriculture, and particularly vineyards. So that's composts and mulches. So that was very interesting. Thanks, Susie. Okay, so what am I speaking about today? So Darren asked me to assist DPI and the Wine Industry Association to look at the viticulture and winemaking small to medium enterprises. That's what I mean by SME. And our project aimed to reduce waste generation, disposal and associated costs for these businesses like I'm sure all of you are involved in, and look at helping the industry access a toolkit of resources and advisory services to help minimise waste and costs. Okay, so how did we go about that? Very quickly, we looked at all
Angus, just lost your volume. Angus.
back. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you're back. Can you go back one slide?
How much did you miss?
What did we do?
What do we do? Okay, so we reviewed the existing databases and searchable online systems for finding waste and recycling services. And we looked at the existing information and advisory services that were out there. We then went out and consulted individual businesses in the Hunter and Orange wine regions. We started by doing what we call preliminary visual waste assessments with 13 of those businesses, interviewing employees of those businesses involved in waste management, looking after the waste where there was waste. And just like Susie, I'd like to thank, if any of those businesses are online today, for their involvement and the time they gave to the project. It was a really important insight. Okay, so what did we find? So 3 out of those 13 viticulture and wine related SME had previously participated in a program called Bin Trim, which is a New South Wales government advisory service for small businesses to help them do exactly what we're talking about, reduce waste and cost. And they'd all done a pretty good job of implementing actions to reduce waste and cost. And really, out of the 13, we only found 1 who had not recently, as in the last 3 or 5 years, reviewed their waste costs and had therefore considerable scope for savings. Most that we consulted had already done a pretty good job. Good source separation, which is absolutely critical to achieving good resource recovery, was going on in most of those businesses. The main issue that we found, as you can see in the picture there on this slide, was that film plastic was often put in recycling bins, and there tends to be a lot of that sort of shrink wrap, pallet wrap style plastic, particularly at cellar doors and warehouses. That is not a recyclable material in yellow bin recycling, and there was quite a bit of that found in the yellow bins we looked at. Okay, so what did we see? This is it in a nutshell. The savings in this industry will come mainly from testing the market, i.e. making the contractors compete. Careful negotiation with ongoing monitoring of those contractors and implementing a few changes, simple changes on site, make all the difference. It's really not about improving source separation in most cases. It's mainly about getting the best deal out of those contractors. And what we found is as soon as you weren't looking for more than a year or 2, your costs would start creeping up. And you'd be paying for things that you weren't necessarily using. So we looked at waste in vineyards, and particularly of concern was this CCA treated timbers, which are used in the posts. They're often stockpiled on vineyards, we found, but those piles don't tend to be very large. And for the people we consulted, the businesses we consulted, they incur no cost, no landfilling cost, and really weren't considered a major issue, which was a surprise to us actually, because we thought that that would be one of the concerns. There's an excellent document produced by Green Industry South Australia, obviously a decent set of wine regions in South Australia, which has excellent info on CCA treated timber posts, and essentially their message is look for alternatives, and they do provide some information on that. So as for other wastes in vineyards, only the really large ones have any sort of significant quantities of wire, which is another particular waste. Most of the rest of the waste is just dealt with through normal municipal curbside bin services on those farms. So the other source, Grape Mark, it's never disposed to landfill, as probably all of you know already. Rather, it is composted, although frequently not very well, just piled up and allowed to decompose, or occasionally fed to animals. And some small to medium enterprises that we looked at more on the medium side with Tyrrells had implemented more elaborate composting processes, and they were really treating it as a resource and using it on their actual vines as a composted product. So in short, waste in vineyards wasn't the main source of cost or disposal to landfill. So where did the waste come from? Cellar doors can produce significant quantities of cardboard and glass, but they have to be really quite big before there is a real problem with managing the waste from those cellar doors. Wineries only produce significant quantities of waste really if they bottle, which more and more is going off-site or utilising mobile bottling. So there's often centralised bottlers, and that was the case with Tyrrell's. They'd moved their bottling off-site, and that's why their waste services weren't quite matching their needs. It's really the restaurants, cafes and accommodation that is where the majority of the waste comes from in wine regions. Special events, one-offs, they produce a lot of waste on 1 or 2 days. Not at the moment with COVID, of course, but in future again they will. But they're very irregular, and the waste is usually managed by the event organizer, or should be, if you can possibly manage it. And as I said, those centralised bottling services, they're both a waste generator, but they also are an opportunity for aggregating particularly cardboard and glass from a wine region, and having the equipment to manage that material on site. So a few key messages for general messages for everyone. There's some more specific advice in the outputs from the project. Look, cardboard compactors are really rarely required for most small to medium enterprises in this sector. You need to be producing a lot of cardboard to justify it. You're better just a flat stack of cardboard in a big 3 cubic metre or 3,000 litre bin, and make sure it's kept closed so it doesn't get wet or dirty. The key thing is to keep the cardboard separate. If you do that, it costs little or nothing to get collected. And you can also usually add in the small amounts of paper from on-site offices into those bins. One of the businesses that we attended, I think it was Brokenwood, is looking at purchasing a small machine to perforate their waste cardboard, basically to replace the bubble wrap, which is put into incomplete boxes of wine when they're selling it from their cellar door, just to get rid of that unrecyclable component and reuse packaging material that they already have. The other one, the other big one, of course, in winemaking is glass. And look, admittedly, it can be cheaper and easier, particularly when you're a small business, to put the glass into the recycling bin. But I have to tell you that at the moment, with the current infrastructure around the country, glass going into those bins, getting broken and mixed, is unlikely to be recycled. Where there are restaurants or really large cellar doors, perhaps an on-site glass crusher might be viable, and we've got a link and then some examples for that. You can see the picture on the right-hand side. There is actually a glass crusher that produces very fine glass, or what we call glass sand. And that picture's taken at Margan in the Hunter. They actually use that crushed glass on their internal roads and driveways to effectively patch holes in the road. So useful output, and really you might not be thinking that that's going to a higher or being upcycled into a higher beneficial use, but it actually saves a lot of transport and impacts from having to reprocess that material. So it's actually a pretty good outcome. There is potential for some of those particularly those big bottlers, to act as a centralized facility for crushing bottles, and therefore reducing the cost of recycling for everyone. But that requires further investigation by the association before it can be implemented. Obviously, it requires an extra level of coordination. So when it comes down to it, The other recyclable containers that you might put into your commingled or yellow top recycling bin aren't a very big portion, particularly by weight, of what is recyclable at wineries and cellar doors. And even in accommodation and restaurants and cafes. A couple of the businesses that I visited were essentially using their own bins, boxes, bulker bags to store those containers on site, and then they would allow their staff to take it to local depots for drop-off. There's a scheme in New South Wales called Return and Earn. You've probably seen the ads on TV. And that scheme is a container deposit scheme, and you basically get 10 cents per container by taking it to the depot. So it's a way to either create something to donate, an amount of money to donate, or an incentive for staff to take that material away and get it recycled. And stuff that goes through Return and Earn is kept very clean and separate and is definitely recovered. And look, we talked earlier about the plastic film. It's a really troublesome material, to be honest. Unless you have really significant warehousing on site, the small quantities of film plastic that really need to just be going into the general waste and not contaminating the recycling. That's probably the best thing you can do with it at this stage. Okay. So the last thing to think about is your organic waste. Now, unfortunately still, although it's growing in New South Wales, the commercial collections of source separated organic waste are rarely available, particularly in rural regional areas. So for situations where you have small amounts of organic waste, setting up a worm farm or basically having a chicken run and feeding chickens is probably your best bet. You do have to be careful about which organic waste you give them, but it can help reduce your waste overall. If you have a really big restaurant or venue or something like that, accommodation, you might use what we've got pictured on this slide here, which is an organic recycling system on site called Closed Loop, which is a rapid composting system that produces a material suitable for use in your veggie garden or even back out in your fields. You can't sell this product without, sorry. You can't sell the recycled organic product out of this unit unless it complies with regulations in New South Wales, which is probably more trouble than it's worth for the small quantities, but you can use it yourself. I would say organic recycling at this stage on site generally doesn't save money or time, but it has one of the best outcomes environmentally of all the recycling activities that you can do. So this is actually pictures from Margan again, who have pretty much done everything you can possibly do in terms of resource recovery on site. And they got this piece of equipment with help from the New South Wales government, a rebate. So as a winemaking business, what can you do? I really encourage you to review your contracts and test the market at least every 2 years and preferably annually. Review your waste contract and invoices at least quarterly and preferably monthly. Assign responsibility for these reviews to a specific staff member. Where your annual waste costs exceed about $5,000 each year, it's probably worth getting independent special advice. There is subsidised waste assessments available, and that is provided by government in New South Wales. I will say that by allocating a relatively small amount of time and attention to reviewing the waste collection arrangements, Tyrrell's wine cut their waste costs by over 55%, which represented over $20,000. They're a relatively large business, I admit, but that's what is on offer if you pay attention. There's some great guides, handbooks, and checklists available. Here are two of the best. and this will again be available for click through after the presentation. I encourage those that need help to access the New South Wales Government's bin trim program. They fund specialist waste assessors who undertake visual waste assessments and help you come up with an action plan. You can email that address to get that initial waste assessment. If you need to get on-site recycling equipment, some of which I've shown you today, you can get a 50% government rebate of up to $50,000 to help cover the costs of that equipment, which is a great opportunity. And that's me. Appreciate your time and attention, and I wish you all the best with your resource recovery. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Angus. Good presentation, and plenty of avenues to either save money or get help on utilising those services provided by the government on reducing people's waste to landfill. I don't see any questions in the conversation, Angus.
I think I've taken my whole time anyway, haven't I, Darren?
You're right on. You're right on. Yes. So we might step forward, and I'm hoping I can't see Jason's face at the moment, but I'm hoping Jason can hear me. And Jason,
yes. Somewhere in the matrix. Hang on.
Somewhere in the matrix.
Hang on.
There he is. Hi, Jason. How are you?
Good. You see a screen?
If you share your screen, I'll just introduce you. And Nick from Nashdale Lane Wines, if you're online now, that would be good to see you. I was for 10 minutes there through Angus's conversation and presentation. I was trying to get Nick online, so apparently his link's not working, but seems to be the only one. But I'll try and get to you, Nick, if you're not there at the minute. Jason, are you ready to go?
Yeah, can you see my desktop?
I can see you, but I can't see your shared screen yet. Anyway, if you go through that process. Jason Smith is a research viticulturalist based at Charles Sturt campus in Orange. Jason has an extensive knowledge in the viticulture and grapevine physiology space and is here with us today to talk about water use components in vineyards and approaches to adapting to seasonal variation in water availability. So Jason, can you share your screen?
I am sharing it.
There you go.
Now. Full screen.
Yep, full presentation. You're ready to go.
All right, thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Jason.
So look, the topic of my talk today is basically related to a project I'm working on in Orange, looking at water use components in vineyards and sort of how we can look at adapting to declining rainfall or higher seasonal variability in water availability. So to give it a little bit of context to this project, obviously people are aware that the wine industry is facing rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns due to climate change. We're going to be facing more temperature extremes, rainfall extremes, and in the longer term, predicted to spend more time in drought. So rain-dependent and supplementary irrigated vineyards are potentially more exposed to this seasonal variability. However, one advantage in these situations is these locations can be cooler, higher rainfall, and there can be less of a difference between your water demand, so the evaporative demand and transpiration demand and rainfall. So you've got a bit more scope to play around in that gap to reduce the impact. So what I was really interested in is looking at opportunities to use some of the experience from non-irrigated systems to sort of understand how you can modify your water balance in favour of your vines and potentially get more out of water that you do have available for irrigation. So one of the questions obviously is how do you assess the capacity of these measures to adapt to the change in water availability? So can you do things that make a difference? So people will be aware of the Australia's Wine Future Climate Atlas that came out recently from the University of Tasmania with Wine Australia. I won't go into a lot of detail, but this is a very comprehensive resource about what sort of happened in the regions in the last 20 years and also what's projected to happen in the future. And to sort of summarise it briefly, essentially this has been able to show that during the last 20 current periods, so approximately the last 20 years, we tend to have seen a shift towards lower winter and spring rainfall, so less rainfall in the off season. And as an example, if you look at Orange, you might say we've lost, say, approximately 50 millimetres. That's very general at the moment. And if you project that forward and we continue under a high emission scenario, is that going to turn into 100 mils or 150 mils in 20 years' time? So it's not about the absolute number, but it's just understanding if that's changing, have we got the capacity to sort of make up for that difference without necessarily finding more water? So one of the approaches that's been used in Europe, and I've spent 3 years working over there before I came back to Orange, has been water balance modelling. So they've had an interest in that, sort of trying to understand where water is used in the vineyard, with one of the applications to project that forward and say, look, how is our vineyard water situation going to change in the future? And so very quickly, these essentially take soil information, so information about your site, slope, aspect, total soil water holding capacity. They feed in things like ground cover, so have you got a cultivated mid-row, have you got a green cover, weather conditions, the size of your canopy, and then they put that together to sort of make an estimate of how the soil water would track through the season, and then validate that against real measurements. And so this is sort of particularly where I'm interested in picking up, because I sort of see a similar, not a dissimilar situation in some of our cooler regions. And I'd also acknowledge that there has been or is current and ongoing work in this area in hotter climates. So I'm sort of looking at putting this work into the supplementary down to rainfall fed vineyard situation. So this is a very simple hypothetical example of what a water balance might try and do. Model is doing, you've got a vineyard, you've got a root zone, which part of it may be shared between your cover crop or mid-row if you've got it, and then you'll have part of that that's probably more just vine roots. You've got the vine using water, you've got your cover crop if it's green, or the mid-row using water, and you've got evaporation on the surface. This water use is potentially referred to as potential evapotranspiration, or it's driven by that evaporative demand of the atmosphere, which is air temperature, humidity, wind speed, and particular radiation interception by the canopy. So these are some of the variabilities that drive that water use. Into that system, you might have rainfall, irrigation if you've got it. You might have drainage below the root zone, you might have lateral flow, capillary rise. So what a model might do is, again, very hypothetical example, is you might say, look, starting on day 0, I had 110 millimetres of available water in the soil. The demand during that period, say the potential reference evapotranspiration might have been 55. I might have used 50% of that and have gone down 30 mils through transpiration and evaporation. Might have had 10 mils go into the system from rainfall. I put 5 mils of irrigation on, no drainage. And so I've ended up at the end of that week period with 95 mils of water in the soil profile. And so essentially you're just trying to add up the millimetres in this system, and you understand if I reduce the size of the canopy, if my competition is less, how does that change that situation? And one other important point is that starting water value of 110 millimetres, it's important how it relates to the total it can hold. And that soil might have been 260 millimetres, which is referred to as a total transpirable soil water. And if you're down to 95, you've got 30% of that remaining, 37%. And that's can also be termed the fraction of transpirable water. And if that gets below 40%, you're into the starting of the water deficit stage. So that'll start to impact on your water use. So the project we've started in Orange is to basically try to collect a data set around vineyard water use, soil water dynamics, such that we can start taking a similar approach and sort of predicting and comparing that to measured values of water use. So this has got 3 vineyard sites in Orange, from 878, 750 down to 610 metres on contrasting soil types, so trying to get an interaction of soil and climate. And the idea is through the season just gone was to basically just follow the soil water dynamics and establish some of those starting parameters with the soils. And then for the next 2 seasons, follow these in more detail, also looking at vineyard water use, detailed weather conditions at the sites, so that we sort of get a data set that can start making these predictions about water use and changing your system. So just to give a very quick summary of how those sites were set up last year. So the soil moisture monitoring has been undertaken with a Centec diviner. So it's a manual capacitance probe measuring every 10 centimetres with an access tube about once a week. We've installed them 4 along a row, about 12 vines, so just alternating down a row, as the picture up on the right-hand side. And have also, at one of the sites, we had mid-row tubes put in and have finished installing all those this winter. So we've now got under vine and mid-row tubes, and had 2 spare tubes a couple of rows across in case we decided to wet some up or dry them down differently. So this is a very quick visual overview of what the data from those tubes has shown when you average all the 4 tubes. So for site 1, site 2, site 3, so don't worry about the details, let's just get the visual impression of the colours. So brown is dry, blue is obviously wet, and the brown is down to almost no water available within that 10 centimetres, up to say 25 to 35 millimetres available within that 10 centimetres. So essentially the idea, this is starting at bud break, going through to leaf fall. And just a couple of quick points that you can see that the start of the season, so bud break in 2019, none of these profiles were full. Some of them had irrigated prior to bud break. These all dried down almost to the lower limit of or essentially to the lower limit of root extraction. And then people are aware, obviously, we started getting storms and then rainfall pretty much right on harvest and then following harvest. And the lowest points were sort of confirmed with stem water potential measurements. So through January, early February, reached a low point in all those vineyards. So just again, some very quick summary of these figures. So for site 1, 2 and 3, the difference between the driest point that the roots could extract and this potentially upper drained limit has come out about 220 mils, 230 and 350 mils in these soils. So that's the total available water available to the plants, and that would be 2.2 megalitres up to 3.5. And of interest, because I'm certainly interested in looking at what's happening deeper in the profile, some of the first 2 sites, 30% of that water was below 1 metre, and that was confirmed where we saw some of the roots when we were doing the tubes, and a bit less at the 3rd site. When they started the 2019 season, there was 96 millimetres, 58 millimetres and more at site 3. Rainfall through that winter period leading up to bud break, through the season, 156, approximately 196 and 205, and then either no irrigation, approximately 50 mils or approximately 100, and need to confirm that with some volume measurements under the drippers. But the interesting thing that's come out of this is that the soil, even in an irrigated vineyard in these situations, the rainfall and the starting water is still the bigger component of your water budget. And so the plan for the coming up season is to basically continue this for another 2 seasons and to include a lot more detail with the water use components in the vineyard. How are we going for time, Darren? So just to make
2 more minutes, but no,
2 more
no
minutes,
problem.
okay, I'm going to have to finish it here. So just a couple of general observations that have come out of this. The trend across all these sites has been similar irrespective of the irrigation. So you can see that those soil water profiles really were determined by the rainfall and the starting soil water as determined by rainfall. Where I had the tubes, which have been 15 to 30 centimetres away from the drippers, I couldn't really see any of the irrigation events, even in the irrigated vineyard. So it's a very small area that water's going in. How that irrigation effect was obvious in the shoot growth and stem water potential through the season. So you can measure the benefit of it in the plant. But in terms of soil, as soon as you got away from the wetting area, you were just measuring that sort of bulk dry down. And also that natural water, the rainfall, is still the big contribution. So sort of what I'm interested in is how you can make more of that. How do you conserve it in a dry year? And I think it raises a few questions about soil moisture monitoring. So do you, of interest to sort of know what your winter recharge is away from where you're going to irrigate. So you really know your starting situation to depth, so deeper into the root zone. And then you need sort of higher resolution, more frequent monitoring if you're going to be in the wetted area of your irrigation system. One general point of interest was we only had tubes in one of the sites last year, and that was a non-irrigated vineyard. And the mid-row tubes and the row tubes essentially dried down exactly the same rate. So the water use was almost uniform across the row and the mid-row, which is quite interesting. So one of the things we want to look at a bit more is where the root zone is, the different species. I'm going to have to skip through some of the, very quickly, I guess, what we saw essentially was that with the dry conditions last year, now with the recharge, I've almost picked up the extremes in one season. So in orange, if I sort of just look back through the records a little bit and understand from people in 2016, you had so much rain, you just have had to have water coming out of the top of hills. That between 2016 and 2020, you've almost appeared to have gone through a full cycle. So you've gone potentially full recharge in 2016, which is hypothetical. And then you've sort of had winters of below average rainfall for 3 years, which has potentially left you in that situation in 2019. At the start of the season, we had a very dry subsoil, a little bit of water in the topsoil from the winter rain. So you started that season very dry. And then now you've come back to the situation where you've got complete recharge of these profiles up here. I'm going to have to skim through that one very quickly. One of the things I'm also interested in sort of the extent to which we can take more advantage of long-range climate forecasts. So people will be aware that there's going to be well, the predictions are for a wetter season coming up still, which contrasts starting conditions last year. Last year we were sort of at the same point in September, dry soil profiles with predictions that we're going to have dry conditions into spring. This season we've got full profiles, and just looking at, this is just a quick example of a summary of models that are put together for GRDC by a former colleague of mine, Dale Gray, who works for Agriculture Victoria. And they put together a newsletter called The Fast Break, which covers South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales. And they summarise essentially 12 global climate models or model ensembles. So you've got the Bureau's Access model, but you've also got a lot of other models, American, US, European models. And essentially that information is available sort of 3 months and 6 months, or for the next 3 months, and also the 3 months following that, so spring and summer. And so this is the current model run summary for August this year. So at this point in time, the rain forecast for spring is most of these models are predicting wetter, and then they're sort of coming back to a bit neutral through summer. So if you were to skip through, if you were to summarise that situation last winter, we had a very dry profile in spring. This is just one example. With a lot of these models, 7 of these models trending towards predicting a dry spring, 4 a bit mixed across southern New South Wales, and then becoming less certain as it went into summer. And this year the situation is you've got a fuller profile. Predictions are generally towards wetter conditions continuing through to November, becoming a bit more neutral through summer. So this is really one of the questions at the end, is just how can you, if this sort of cycles in water availability is probably the driving challenge at the moment, how can you sort of adapt your management, or can you adapt your sort of management each year to take more advantage of that, or sort of moderate the worst of the dry conditions, maybe take more advantage of the wetter conditions? So this work is going on, so it'll go for another 2 years. That's a plan, with hopefully the opportunity to branch it out into more treatments to deliberately manage your vineyard water balance and quantify the effects on yield and also fruit composition. All right, and I'd just like to thank the wineries involved, Seesaw, Ross Hill and Anglong Wines. Also had a lot of help getting this set up with Peter Hedberg and Dave McKenzie, and a number of other people have come up and helped me hammer in tubes various times last winter when it was incredibly dry. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Jason. Fantastic presentation. I really see the merit in this after going through the drought of the last couple of years for growers, and looking at a little bit of a turnaround now, and just determining where they go from here if this cycle, as you say, sort of continues on. My question to you would be the importance of those interactions between what is growing under vine rows and mid rows as well. So that's part of the next step, isn't it?
Hopefully, yeah. Look, it's just look, the experience with this work in Europe is that the vineyard floor can be quite a uniform area in terms of drying down. So that's sort of one question: is that the case when you have a small wetted zone? Do you have roots that cross in from the mid row under your vines? Does that use a significant proportion of it? So it's one of the questions is how much is that competition significant? I mean, if that dries off very quickly in spring, does it make a difference? Is it making a difference earlier in the spring, like right now, when that's using water that your vine's not using? So I think there's a lot of questions about species selection and what are the sort of characteristics you're looking for if you want something under your vines or in the mid-row.
Based around water.
Around water, yeah. Sort of ignoring nutrition and everything else.
Yes, yeah. All good. I'm looking at the conversation and I'm not seeing any questions come through. Just give people a minute for that. Here we go. I've got one from David Lowe. Brian Freeman did some excellent research using potted vines to demonstrate how water was used by root systems. You're obviously familiar with Brian's work, Jason.
Some of it, yes. Which
one exactly?
Which one?
Yeah. But yeah, I think David's just making a question to go back maybe and have a look at what's been done in the past. I'm sure that's in your literature reviews. Okay, no other questions coming through, Jason, so appreciate your time and presentation. Again, yes, all the presentations will be made available to everyone. We're going to move on to Jamie Buttigieg. Jamie is a digital marketer and brand story expert. Prior to starting his own digital marketing agency, he was head of sales and operations for Thorn Group and Radio Rentals across Australia. With changes in consumer behaviour due to COVID-19, your website is becoming increasingly important as consumers look for new ways to engage and purchase. Jamie believes that most businesses are making 5 mistakes with their websites. It's costing them sales, and today he is going to share some simple tips that cost almost nothing to implement that will grow your online business. So Jamie, please take it away.
Hey Darren, and thanks for allowing me to be here today, and thanks to everyone for sticking around. You can obviously hear me. Can you see this screen, my title screen there?
Yes. All
right, good to go. So, as Darren said, coronavirus has certainly changed the way we use the internet, and Aussies are spending more time online and certainly on streaming services such as Netflix, Stan or Amazon. And your website and online presence is more important than ever before. And there are 5 common mistakes that I see most brands make on their websites, which are costing them sales. And today, hopefully I can share some simple ideas that you guys can take advantage of for little or no cost that'll help you grow website traffic and sales. And before we jump into that, let me just get to the next slide. Think about this question for a minute. How many website visitors have you had in the last 30 days? For those of you who have websites, and I'd imagine that almost everyone on the call will. Prior to COVID, I was at a real estate convention, and that was a 3-day event. And as I was meeting people, I was asking them this same simple question. The interesting point was that not one of them could give me an answer. But over the course of maybe 2 or 3 days, some of them came back to me and sort of being overachievers as real estate agents tend to be. One would have 570 a month, and they'd go back to their analytics or ring their web team. And one lady came up to me on the last day of the conference and she said, Jamie, I've got 2,500 a day. She had 2,500 website visitors a day. Now, the ironic thing here is that she was paying thousands of dollars to attend this conference to learn how to grow her business when she had 2,500 interested people on her website every day that she had no idea she had. So I did the same thing here, and I just Googled a few New South Wales wineries, from small family operated businesses to some of the larger ones, and the numbers range. The smallest one that I could find had around 608 visitors, and the largest one had around 32,000 visitors a month. And I'm sure there's a spread either side of that. But the question then becomes, how many of these website visitors actually bought something off your website or actually signed up to your database? And for many of you, I think the number would scare you. You'll find the majority of people leave your website without doing anything. And why is that? Well, it's often because websites are cluttered and confusing. They're all about you and not about your potential customer. And I think for many people on this call, there is a big opportunity to capitalize on that traffic that's already coming to your website. And we don't have a lot of time, so let's jump into number one, confusion. Okay, so confusion to me is one of the biggest mistakes that is likely costing you sales. And one example of this is a cluttered top menu. Okay, when you think about your website, all websites have a menu, or most websites have a menu across the top. And some of them might have 5 options, some have 35 options. There were some crazy examples that I saw across the wine industry. But I want you to think about this. Every option, every link, every button, every decision, or every thought that you cause a consumer to have is distracting from your call to action. And that is the goal of your website. What is it that you want them to do? Another example of confusion on your website is too much copy, using too many words. You know, so many brands are trying to tell their customer everything about their organization in one page. You know, they think that the customer needs to know everything about us or they won't buy something. But I think we need to take a step back and have a fresh look at our websites. Your website, or certainly each page of your website, should have one purpose. You know, what's the main aim? Is it to sell wine? Is it to take restaurant bookings, to get people to visit your cellar door? You know, do you want them to buy your product from another retailer perhaps? Now, your copy and your call to action should reflect this singular aim. So the other thing is I talk about clarity equals conversions. A lot of brands, and particularly a lot of marketers in our industry, try to be so creative. They're trying to be clever in order to differentiate themselves. But the truth is the human brain is drawn towards simplicity. We're drawn towards clarity and away from confusion. And we've got a bit of a saying here when we talk about websites, and that is, if you confuse, you'll lose. Okay, if you confuse, you'll lose. HubSpot did an interesting study a couple of years ago where they looked at 77,000 different websites across the planet. And what they found was, when they boiled down the data, is that those websites that actually made money, those websites that performed the best, they were written to a 9th grade English level or below. They had shorter sentence structures, less words, less copy, and they had a clear call to action. So it's a really interesting takeout for me, which brings us into mistake number 2. Call to action. As I was looking at a few websites across New South Wales wineries, I found that most were making one of these 2 mistakes in relation to their call to action. Some had no clear call to action at all. Their site was just a collection of pretty pictures, a bit about your history and the lovely soil, you know. And other sites were kind of yelling at me, like they didn't know what they wanted their visitors to do. You know, shop now, join our wine club, book a table, visit our cellar door, buy tickets to the long lunch, sign up to my newsletter, right? Each page on your site should have a single, clear call to action. All right, let's have a look at an example. So I tried not to pick on anyone locally or put anyone on the spot here. Now, so I'm looking everywhere because I've got a couple of screens set up here. This is from a little website in the Napa Valley, right? Now, it's not a bad website, but by no means is it a good one. But I want to illustrate a point here in relation to your call to action. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving here, but in the top right-hand corner of this site, thanks, Daz, there's a big blank piece of real estate. I want to tell you now, when someone lands on your website in the first 5 or 10 seconds, this is the most valuable piece of real estate that you have, because the human eye starts at the top left and we scan in this sort of Z pattern or F pattern down a website. What I want to see here on websites is your direct call to action. You know, when you figure out the aim of your website, is it buy now, shop now, book a table, whatever it is, I want to see a dirty, great big button up here that says do that, okay? And minimize this top menu, okay? As I said earlier, the more options you have across your top menu, the more you will distract from what it is that you want them to do, and the more your sales will suffer. Here's an example. Now, I just mocked this up for the presentation. This brand hasn't seen this web page before, but this is how I would approach it, okay? So I've simplified their top menu. And you can see now there's a nice big button there that says shop now. And even before they start to scroll down the page and consume any other information about this brand, I've repeated that call to action. Repetition of your call to action is important. Don't hide the cash register. Okay, so many brands and websites, I go to their website and I can't figure out how to buy the product or how to engage with them. You know, few other points here, like the imagery is a bit different, and I'll come to that in a later slide. Small batch Napa Valley wines, real simple heading. You know, we don't need to tell them everything in one breath. Okay, what I learnt about that website here was that they produce small batches of wines and they source them throughout this valley. So why aren't we telling people that? Anyway, call to action, make it clear. Okay, next one. I'm flying through this, Daz. This is good. All right, lead generation, email marketing. I think when looking across the websites in the New South Wales wine industry, I think this is probably one of the most overlooked opportunities. And I think you'll agree, when you actually figure out the amount of people that visit your website and how many aren't taking any action, I think you'll see the importance of this. Your email marketing is probably one of your biggest or potential streams of consistent sales. And a lot of people roll their eyes here and say, Jamie, email marketing is dead. And it's not. Your email marketing and your email database is gold, because even in 2020, it provides an ROI of $38 for every dollar spent. And that's today. And I challenge you, anyone who's doing Google ads, Facebook ads, any sort of digital marketing, to find me a channel that can produce that sort of return on investment. Okay, I challenge you to do that. So email marketing will not only increase your sales, but it creates this umbilical cord to the consumer. Okay, it improves your customer retention. So obviously, before we get to email marketing, we need to start by growing your database. Some of you on the call maybe don't have a database, or some have a database that's maybe sitting a bit dormant. And I want to share a few ideas on how to grow that database, because no one cares about your newsletter. Okay, stop asking people to sign up for your newsletter. Offer them something valuable. Here's an example, right? Now, I don't know a lot about the wine industry, but these are two pop-ups, right? This is what most brands have. Sign up to our newsletter. And here's one that I just made up, right? How to taste wine like a sommelier, a 3-part video mini course. Now, as a consumer, I know which one I'd exchange my email address for. Okay, I don't want any more spam. I don't want your newsletter. Okay, and those that have it, if you actually look at the number of people that are signing up to your newsletter, it's probably less than 0.5%. Okay, a call to action like this might yield a 3 to 8% conversion rate. Who knows? And so your job is to figure out what people are interested in, or what problem they're trying to solve when they come to your website. Yeah. Okay, next one. Search engine optimization. Okay, how to outrank your competitors on Google. Now, I don't want to get too technical. I could probably take 3 days talking about this. I should take a breath. Search engine optimization simply refers to optimizing your website so that you can appear higher. I'm trying to get through it all, Daz, and more often in Google searches. Okay, so it's about how your website appears to Google, and then where you appear in those Google searches. Those brands that appear closer to the top of the search are getting more traffic, and often it's free traffic. A quick point on intent, or consumer intent. Okay, in a buyer journey, there's a trigger and a purchase point. I don't know if you can see my hands because I can't see myself here. There's a trigger and a purchase point. And when somebody goes to Google and types in something like, I don't know, Hunter Valley Wineries or something like that, they're pretty close to making a purchase decision. Okay, this is why it's really important to make sure your website is friendly for Google, and I'll share with you a way that you can do that. If you go back to the beginning of the book, like a lot of brands are focused on social media and social media advertising, and that's okay as well. It's important, it's got its place. But when you think about it, people are on social media, they're looking at cute cat videos, they're interacting and talking with their family, and they're not there to buy wine. Okay, so you're trying to interrupt their feed with advertisements about your product. Now that has a place, and you can build your brand around that. And some of those people might be interested in buying wine, but I'd argue if you want to get sales and get them faster, we need to make sure that we're present on Google. Okay, if we're not being found on Google, we're losing a piece of that important pie. So here's, for those who maybe aren't that Google savvy, let me break this down really, really quickly. The top ones here, you'll see a little word that says add next to the wine collective here. So I've just Googled red wine, right? It's just a generic search that I did for the point of the illustration. These guys here are paying to be here. So they buy some keywords, like they buy the word red wine, and that Google will serve their ads up first. What does Google do that? Well, because they make billions of dollars out of ad revenue. Underneath that, you'll see these ones here are free. You can't pay to be in these organic searches, and Google will rank you based on the quality of your website. You need to have an engaging, relevant website that helps users find something or solve a problem. Okay. The point I guess I'm trying to make here is that you need to pay attention to your blogs and the content on your website. I think you need to keep your websites fresh and current. Okay, write blogs about things that people are searching for. Okay, try and understand your customers' search intent. Now, Google loves websites that contain fresh, relevant content. It'll reward you by placing you above your competitors. Now, in this example here on the screen, on average, this first organic ranking would receive about 35% of the traffic. So for, let's say there are 100,000 people typing in red wine. Okay, these guys will get 35% of that volume, that traffic. Number 2 gets about 15, number 3 might get about 6%, and if you're beyond that, you don't get very much at all. So it's worth investing in this over the long term. The next question people often ask is, well, how do I know what to write about? Like, what do I put on my blogs? And this is the tool I was talking about a little earlier. Write it down. Uber Suggest. It's a keyword tool. It's a fun tool because you can also spy on your competitors and see how much traffic they're getting. You can look at their Google strategies, and for the most part, it's a free product. But I've got 2 examples here. Wineries in the Hunter Valley and Hunter Valley Cellar Door. There are 12,100 searches every single month for this keyword, wineries in Hunter Valley. There are only 320 searches for Hunter Valley Cellar Door. So if I were writing a blog or putting content on my website, okay, I want to be writing blogs that contain these keywords. Okay, this would be the heading of my blog article, for instance. So I guess what I'm saying here is go back to this keyword tool, try and understand what your customer is searching for, and then write content about that intent. Okay, hopefully I've explained that clearly. All right, next one, imagery. Okay, now imagery is really important to help people connect with your brand on an emotional level. Okay, your image or your imagery should paint a picture of what success looks like when people do business with your brand. Now, wherever possible, and of course, you guys are in an interesting industry, you've got to do this responsibly. Your imagery should contain people. Okay, like if I were a kitchen company, I build kitchens for a living, I'd want a picture on my homepage of a family laughing, sharing a meal in their new kitchen, right? So having people in your imagery is important because it helps people connect and visualize themselves in that moment. Sales are made on an emotional level, not on a logical level. Okay, so most brands are just using pretty product shots. That makes it hard for people to connect on an emotional level. Okay. Okay, take a breath. Next slide. Recommended reading. All right, so just before we jump into questions, and hopefully I've got a few, here's a book definitely worth reading if you haven't already. It provides a really simple framework that brands can use to simplify their message, create a compelling brand story, and ultimately build a website that actually makes money. Now, if it feels like sometimes you're wasting money on marketing, this is the book that will change all that. In fact, when I found the book, I wished I'd found this like 4 years earlier. So it's called Building a Story Brand. It's by Donald Miller, and it'll really change the way you think about it. It gives you some great insights into how people think and how they make buying decisions. Okay, how we go for time, Darren?
Jamie, spot on as usual. You're a consummate performer. I think everyone has been given some great take-homes out of that. I have one quick question,
sure,
which goes back to one of the earlier slides and the breakdown of those people landing on the sites. Is the percentage of people doing something, regardless of the big site and the little site, are those numbers similar? Or is it that they've just got more traffic and then therefore they get more doing something?
Yeah, you'll find across an industry it would be quite similar. So if I looked at, it doesn't matter if the website had 500 visitors a month or 55,000 visitors a month, there would be an average conversion rate. So they would make sales at a rate of perhaps 1.5%. I don't know what the benchmark is in your industry, But you know, you might have people signing up to your newsletter or downloading your content at a rate of 3%, and so that would be quite stable across, regardless of the amount of traffic that you have. And so the key here is what we're trying to do with these ideas is influence that number. If you can go from a 1% conversion rate to 2% conversion rate, you can effectively double your sales.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good question.
I'm not seeing anything in our conversation. I will scroll down and see if anything's arriving.
There is a, if anyone wants to ask anything privately, you're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Right. Okay. Well, that's up on screen. It'll be made available later. So thumbs up, Jamie.
Cheers.
Talk to you again soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Darren. Cheers.
Okay, so our next presenter, moving back to some viticultural space, is Bruno Hasfel. Bruno, are you there? I can see you in the list.
Yeah, I should be there. I just
share your screen, Bruno.
I've shared my screen. Have I done that? Hang on.
Gerhard in the background. Good to see you.
Hi. Yeah, I haven't shared my screen.
Okay, I'll introduce you as you're sharing screen. Bruno, as most people would know, is Senior Research Scientist with New South Wales Department of Primary Industry, and also a member at NWGIC, and has more than 30 years both practical and research experience in perennial horticulture, with the majority of that spent on researching grapevines, and here to provide an update on the disease-resistant varieties. Bruno, and as I see Gerhard in the background. Take it away, Bruno.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, when we first talked about giving this presentation, we had wine tasting in mind, but as we all know, it was a bit of an interesting year with a few challenges. So this is an update about the disease-resistant varieties. In particular, I mean, it's part of the CSO breeding program. So we have 2 sites in New South Wales, one in Wagga and one in Orange. So that's my main focus. We're now nearly up to, well, basically up to generation 2. Generation 1 is what I mostly will talk about. So that means I have done this for the last 7 years. I probably will do this in another 7 years, or maybe even longer. So there are 2 mildews which obviously create a fair bit of a cost for grape production in Australia, and there's also botrytis, which is a major cost in production. So it would be great to live without it, and one way of doing this, breed resistance into this Vitis vinifera varieties or cultivars. So that's what CSIRO has done, and because there are other Vitis species in the world, we have the American species, and they were used for the first generation of grape vines with resistant, and then now CSIRO is moving to 2nd generation and getting more resistant genes into it by staking them from Asian Vitis species. So the first generation was done by, as I mentioned, by introducing resistant genes from an American species, Vitis species. So that was a slow process conducted in France with a lot of backcrossing to keep the resistant genes in the mix, but also reducing the characteristics of the American species. So it took 2.5 decades to do that. So quite a slow process. And then this hybrid was used to cross with common grape varieties to create our selections, which we are testing for a few years now. So it started off in the Barossa Valley. There were a lot of lines planted, and then eventually 20 best reds and whites were selected from there. Then in 13-14 we planted whites in Wagga Wagga in the Riverina after a request from industry, and added the red varieties a couple of years later to it. There also there were some plantings in Arimple, to CSI site, and then most recently a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, we planted the 20 reds and whites in the orange region, which you're aware of. It's much cooler than the other ones. So let's just show you that we basically have 3 or 4 climates, but Victoria, Arimple and the Riverina is very similar. The Barossa Valley sort of in between the hot climates and the orange region, which the vineyard site there is at 950 millimetres. And you usually have 900 millimetres of rain. As Jason mentioned earlier, there was a bit of a drought, and that was one of the challenges we had, particularly last year, because the dams were getting empty, or were empty basically. But luckily we had a board to get the water from. So that's the schedule for the Riverina and orange, our New South Wales sites, white and red varieties. In blue, that indicates the orange site, black is the Wagga site. So as I said, for the whites we started in Wagga in 13, and with the reds a couple of years later. We have now 3 years of winemaking and sensory for the whites, and 2 seasons for the reds, although this year was interesting, I can imagine, so I will come to that later. So in orange, they're now trained, back again, so we likely do a full red winemaking for Wagga because of the events this year. So yeah, in orange we have got the vines now likely in full production, depending if there's not another event. There can be hail there, has happened while we had the planting there, but hopefully will be all good. So we will make the first wine from both red and white selections from orange next year. So there's a bit of difference between the sites. They're trained to planting density is slightly higher in orange, and there's double the number of vines because we don't expect the yields as high as in Wagga, so we planted more vines, and the training system is more what district usually does, which is vertical shoot positioning. So there's a bit of a difference there. You see the Wagga side on the left and the orange side on the right at an earlier stage. And that just gives you an overview of what happened in the last vintage, not the previous one, 18-19. So as you can see, there is quite a range of difference in the parameters of the selections. When you look at the bunch number, the bunches per vine, there's basically 3-fold difference. Or look at the berry weight for the white selections. You go from something below 1 gram to over 2 grams. So there's a fair bit of range there. And the reds, it's a bit less pronounced, particularly if you look at the berry weights. So, of course, the yield parameters that are reflected, the yield are reflected because of the variation of yield parameters. So there's really the yields vary from 8 tonnes to 25 tonnes for the whites, and the harvest period can extend over 5 to 6 weeks, less so in the reds. I mean, the reds in that year were just starting to produce, so that's why the yields are relatively low, from 5 tonnes to about 15, 16 tonnes, and the harvest was more compact. So when you're looking at some of the compositional information, we try to harvest the whites at 22 bricks, the reds, and that season at 23. We not always hit the right value. It's a bit tricky sometimes. Of course, yeah, the season comes to an end, and we have to finish the harvest, which was a particular challenge in this season. So yeah, so that they vary in their bricks levels, their pH, and tidal acidity in both red and white selections, which comes all in the validation of which selection will make it through to the end to might get planted. So the winemaking protocol is standardized, and obviously there's a difference between the reds and the whites. So we aim for 22 bricks and 23 bricks for the whites and reds respectively, and 50 kilograms were used for ferment. So fermentation temperature was different between the whites and the reds, and of course the yeast was the process is different between reds as well, and so the different yeast is used. So we went to the industry, and every year we go to the brewery to get sensory assessed by winemakers. And on the left, you've got the whites. You can see that total score range is quite variable between the selections. And then in the spider web, you can see that there's quite a different attributes on the left, and aroma compounds on the right. This is citrus and floral attributes differ between the selections. Then on the right side, we've got the reds. The point difference is not as huge as in the whites, but again, you get differences in aroma and the tannin characteristics. So this growing season, as I said, it was an interesting one. We did made some whites, but the focus really is on the reds, because this is only a second full season for the reds of all selections. So you can see the yield varied between 18 kilograms and what's down? Darren, what's up?
Turning my lights back on.
Oh, okay. I thought I was out of time. Yeah, so the yield varies between 18 kilograms per vine to 8. So you can multiply that roughly this 1.5. You come to the tonnage of the per hectare. But the other thing we were trying to get a grip on is because of the botrytis issue, to look at bunch structure, and we're still working on this. So we see how if you can go to a good value for bunch compactness. So that's why the picture's there in the middle. Yeah, when we got the grapes to the vinery, we usually had about a BOMA 12.5. So we were aiming, actually, we're trying to aim to 24 bricks. So we didn't quite get to that high level as we wanted. I guess it was a dry season. It was hot, and at the end, we really had to push them getting into grapes, because we didn't know when the winery was going to close because of the virus. So yeah, again, there's usually most of the selections sit at the around 3.8 with the pH and just over 4 with the TA, but there are always a few outliers which don't fit in the average. So yeah, so then when we go to the winemaking, we reached usually 12% alcohol, and the aim was to get the pH to 3.6 by addition, so that's why the TA levels are higher than before. Yeah, we had nice, interesting flavors: blueberry, sour cherry, banana. We did initial assessment, but it's sort of expected because we had two smoke events in Wagga in early January and mid-January. About a third of the vines had some smoke taint of different descriptions. So in some respect, it's probably good that we don't have a wine tasting this year, but we could have tasted the ones from last vintage. So the orange planting is doing very well. As I said, it looked a bit grim there at some stage because I was concerned running out of water there, but that's now resolved. So we have now them at the cordons have filled up, so should be enough grapes there for a 50 kilogram or 60 kilogram ferment. But we also started planting generation 2, which you see just behind Darren there. I don't know if you have Darren in front of you. So we planted just over 100 generation 2, which has 2 resistant genes for each mildew. So we're expecting another 300 this year, so it makes it 400, with the idea to use actually that material from there to multiply and have the second generation straight in orange at the research station over there. So just briefly before I finish off what the generation 2 is about. So it's bringing basically 4 resistant genes together, so 2 for downy, 2 for powdery. So the first 2 are from the first generation, which we are testing at the moment, assessing at the moment, and then the other 2 genes come from an Asian Vitis species, and the CSO are using the microvine for this purpose, and that really speeds up the process because they're continuously flowering, and so it makes it much faster. And I think it sounds like they advance faster than they expected. So and particularly with the marker assist selection, you can figure out what gene actually came over. So it's much faster than waiting for the great one to grow and see it then. So now the second generation is planted out, as I said, in orange in the Barossa Valley. So we expect, well, maybe 21 might be a bit early, but certainly at the end of the current project, this finishes in 2 years' time, we will look into that production of generation 2. So in summary, or work in progress, we will assess another year of all selections for the reds, particularly lost part of the quality in this interesting vintage. And then we're starting now to get the grapes from orange, which is a challenge because of the logistics to bring them back. All the wines are made here in Wagga, also from the site in Ourimbah in Victoria. And yeah, we're getting more of generation 2 in, and they will be then assessed first in microferments when they're produced. So I expect they will be up to the wire in a couple of years' time. And there's also demonstration site in the Riverina, where we have bigger plantations and rootstocks, but that's not really, that's more a development exercise. So I have to thank the funding body, of course. Macmillan Vines had a lot of input in it, and they initially they initiated the regional site, which now expanded to Orange. And of course, the winemakers. We had a changeover of one winemaker this year, so it went smoothly. And of course, there's a lot of people involved, technical staff and students which come from overseas, probably not this vintage, and of course the collaborators. And that's where I'm finished. So just to show you what's happening in the world. So that's in France, so much more complex. But I think it's important to test, to have varieties for the range of climates in Australia as well, not just one climate. So that's why important to have a cooler side, a warmer side, and a warm side. Yes, thank you for your attention, and that's from me, Darren.
Thanks, Bruno. Great presentation. It's a lot of work. I know how detailed it is, and it's been going for many years, and as you said, many more years to come. I can't see any questions from others in the conversation, but from myself, a couple of quick ones. Will fruit become available to commercial winemakers either this year or next to work with these white and red varieties on a commercial winemaking sense?
Well, I guess that depends on the development project in Griffiths that should be producing, but our vines are basically just for experimental vines.
Sure.
So we need most of them. We don't have much spare, I think.
Okay.
Although we made one student made one from the whole lot, which was left here in 1 year. So.
Okay. pH differences compared to existing varieties, given climate change with pH and things warming up, and is there any standouts with varieties in this group that are?
Good question. There are some which hold the acid very well, and
yep.
When we selected, Gerard is here to comment on it too. When we selected which one goes forward, we looked at acid was one of the issues, yield and how that tastes. So it came into the equation to looking at, and climate change is pretty well on our radar. So is the French, which you just saw in the previous slide.
Okay, one last one for you. Okay, we're moving now into wetter, cooler climates. Is all this gene manipulation holding up? Is that there is no diseases found on the vines?
Well, that's why we try to get two genes. Well, that's why CLO is having a stacked genes in it. But yes, if you get one, what the observations were in Europe, when you take one disease out, breed resistant, there might have been another one coming in. But also that's why we're looking at bunch structure to get a feel for that and feed that back to the breeding program.
And Darren, I'll add to that. The first lot of vines of these vines were planted almost a decade ago in the Barossa, and they still haven't had any disease, although they weren't sprayed at all. So
sure.
So far they seem to hold up pretty good.
But whatever goes out to the industry, we recommend a few sprays. We don't want to sort of their resistance broken. So
right. Okay. Great. All right. Thanks for that, gentlemen. I've got a brief amount of time to get through my presentation, so I will share my screen. Thanks, Bruno. Thanks, Gerhard.
Thanks.
Okay, well, hopefully everyone can see my screen because I can't see anyone else now. So there we go. It's the vagaries of technology. As most people would know, my name's Darren Fay. I work for the Department of Primary Industries as the Development Officer for Viticulture. And my presentation today is going to be on protecting your investment with netting. Increasing weather impacts from hail, sunburn and heat waves during the growing season, along with pest incursions from bats, birds and even kangaroos around harvest has meant growers are looking for alternate ways to protect their crop. This presentation is based on trials funded by Wine Australia, the Greater New South Wales ACT regional program at 2 separate locations last vintage to assess the use of single row drape netting from bunch closure all the way through to harvest. So most people, as you wouldn't realise, would put on nets, but mainly just as the fruit ripens up and bird netting. This is a different style of netting. So very little research has been conducted on the use of single row drape nets on wine grapes in Australia, and some limited work has been done by my colleague here at DPI, Jess Fernley, who has worked on this form of netting with apples and cherries in the past. So when it came to establishing this trial, we took on the advice of Jess with her interactions and also from the supplier as well, because they've been applying this form of netting in the US. And they approached us one day on the Orange site to run out 4 rows at once. And I've got a video of that going on and coming off later in the presentation. So the materials used in this trial, the net is UV stable, high density polyethylene with a mesh size of 6 millimetres by 1.8 millimetres. And a unit mass of 60 grams per square metre. So it's a lot tighter weave than traditional bird netting. The screening factor of each of the nets is 12% for white netting, 18% for green, and 24% for black netting. On the left of your screen, you can see the what looks like a bit of PVC pipe. That was our cheap housing as a Stevenson screen for thermochrome eye buttons. So both temperature and humidity loggers. They were set to collect data every 30 minutes on each of the treatments throughout the trial on both sites, and that was replicated 5 times. Also, on the left, you can see either under the black net or the control there. We've got Optoleaf solar radiation film slides. These were positioned at regular intervals along each of the rows, also at both sites, and these were positioned out in the vineyards for a 7-day exposure period to assess solar radiation. So just looking here at temperature at the Orange site, no statistical significant differences resulted in temperature and humidity under any treatment at either site. And in this slide, you can see that under the black netting, some diurnal reductions occurred at both ends of the temperature spectrum in comparison to the control treatment in blue. So it's mainly across the top at the maximum temperature. You can see, if you can see my pointer, just along through here, you can see these days where the black netting was reduced. So it does have some impact, but not to a statistically significant difference. And also at the bottom end, you can see where these blue controls are just dropping down slightly. So it also had an impact at the minimum overnights. And this was similar at both of the sites. So yeah, just to show you the Hunter, the site reductions under black netting also occurred at the greatest extent at the maximum here across the top compared to the control. And again, a lesser drop in temperature at the minimums overnight. And the reason I'm showing the black netting versus white and the green is this is where, although not significant, this is where most of the differences occurred across all the treatments. So this slide here, this is showing you the percentage losses over a 7-day period of those optoleaf films. And so with regard to solar radiation, the film fade percentage loss of the film is strongly correlated to solar radiation. Therefore, solar radiation was significantly reduced under coloured netting on each of the 7-day exposure periods at both sites, with green and black netting reducing solar radiation consistently the same across both sites, other than the first reading in the Hunter Valley, where black netting stood out on its own, reducing solar radiation the most on this occasion. The first 7-day reading at Orange was the only reading with a minimal impact from smoke haze, hence the high percentage of losses in film across all treatments on this occasion, seen here in the first 7-day reading period. All other sampling points had heavy background smoke haze impacting solar radiation, and therefore fade percentage loss is less overall regardless of the netting. Represented in another way, both sites had a declining trend in solar radiation under each of the nets from white to green to black respectively, when mean differences were analysed across all data points. This is in line with the screening factors I mentioned, the 12, 18 and 24% reductions suggested by the manufacturer. So it's living up to its claim. As you can see, we're trending downwards regardless of the site with those treatments. So we're getting less solar radiation due to the grade in net. When it comes to grape quality, there was no statistical significant differences in Chardonnay grape quality under any treatments at the Orange site. Therefore, I'll just present the Shiraz berry quality parameters for 1920. We didn't assess these wine grapes for smoke. We're just looking at what these net treatments were doing per se for that reduction in solar radiation, and we've got these quality parameters at Brix, pH, TA, malic acid and anthocyanins. The Shiraz black net treatment had the greatest impact on grape quality, with significant reductions in both Brix and anthocyanins. A significant increase in malic acid also resulted at the same time. Previous research has found extreme shading does reduce anthocyanins in Shiraz, and the black net has the greatest screening factor of all of the net colours at 24%. So this could attribute to this outcome. Although increased temperature has long been known as a considerable factor in the respiration-led losses of malic acid, our temperature data was not significantly different between the treatments at this site. But perhaps those small reductions at the maximum that I showed in an earlier slide was enough to assist in generating this result. We will need to monitor respiration more directly in the future trials to support this assumption. When it came to protecting the crop, from fauna around the harvest, birds were only found foraging in fruit in uncovered control rows and within standard bird netting, as can be seen in this photo. There's a bird within that net at the base where they were applied at the Orange site. But at the Hunter Valley site, there was significant losses due to birds foraging on uncovered rows, even outside of the treatment area. For this particular purpose or trial, sorry, no hail events were recorded during this as well. We didn't have or saw any impact from bats or kangaroos where drape netting was applied at any of the trial sites. Moving on to spray coverage. Given the seasonal conditions, the opportunity to fully assess spray coverage was extremely limited, with only one spray actually applied at one of the sites, and this data was obtained from a post-harvest spray from the Hunter Valley site using the SnapCard app from Western Australia to assess percentage coverage. We can see the difference in coverage of each of the water-sensitive papers placed within each of the treatments. And the control in the top left shows control treatment with papers scoring above 50% coverage. So 3 papers there, many also in the high 30s against the white, green and black net, and no water sensitive papers actually were above 50%. And with the majority though to the low end and several under 10%. Although given the limitations of gathering data points last vintage, further studies are required to ascertain if netting would impact pest and disease control measures. So yeah, further work to do on gathering some information for this aspect of the trial. I'm just going to play a short video, and this is the application of 4 single rows of this netting at once. So I'm crossing my fingers that this will work. It's not the greatest video quality. It was taken on my iPad, so bear with me for just watching this for the next minute or so. Okay, as you can see from that video, it does go out fairly quickly. There are staff that are required to position the nets. We did go back after this application and remove these 4 single rows, and I'll just move on to that video now. It's a better quality video. So as you can see here, there's little labour required to remove these nets. It does wind up quite effectively on its own just by travelling down the rows using this overhead spooling system. Admittedly, there is a small canopy due to drought conditions and limited water going onto these vines, but it did go on and come off quite effectively. Okay, so just to summarise on that presentation, this form of netting was easy to apply and remove, was highly effective as a bird control measure. The trial produced some negative quality, great quality assessments with Shiraz, more so with the black netting. However, there was no statistical impact to Chardonnay grape quality. In a season that was in the main hot and dry across the trial period, little differences resulted in temperature and humidity at either site, and the limited data was captured on spray coverage under netting. Hence, with the great support of Justin Jarrett and his staff at Seesaw Wines in Orange and Andrew Pangilly and the team at Tyrrell's Wines in the Hunter Valley, I'm able to announce we will continue with this trial again this vintage at the same sites and hopefully provide industry with further detail on the performance of this style of netting over that long period from bunch closure to harvest. So that's it for me. I'm happy to take some questions. I'll just stop sharing screen from here and come back to you. So let me just get into, yes, so questions. So I've got conversation here. Can the nets be reused? And that is definitely the case. I'm not sure of how many years that you would get out of the nets overall, but I'm sure the manufacturer would be able to supply that sort of information based around evidence that they've got from use across other crops and vines in the US as well. So just, I've got a hand up here as well. Jenny Bright, ready for a question. Jenny, just let me see if I can choose that one. Oh, okay, why did I choose to go for the longer time on rather than just closer to harvest? The idea behind going out earlier was to see if we could have a look at how the vines or how the bunches performed under the nets in regard to sunburn. And so we did do some assessments on brown pigments in Chardonnay, and although there was no significant differences between any of the treatments. And so I believe that knowing what I saw on the vines prior to the nets going on, even though they were quite green and hard small berries, there was already a fair bit of skin damage, and I don't know whether we had you know, that's why some of the differences didn't result under netting. But the idea by the early application is to protect that crop earlier from sun damage instead of spraying on a sunscreen when a heat wave event comes. You've already got some protection due to the screening factors of the net. So that's why, Jenny. Hopefully that answers your question. So I can't see any further questions there. So just to finish up, I hope you've enjoyed today's presentations. Again, they will be made available via a link through an email, and they're also published on our next Vine Watch bulletin. Just to let you know, the Grapevine Management Guide is finalised and published, and also that is downloadable from a link we'll be putting in our next Vine Watch. Hard copies will be distributed through local associations this year due to not having these face-to-face events. And I look forward to catching up with many of you across the vintage this season. So cheers from me. Thank you for joining us. That's it for now.
Thanks, Darren.